jumping into the world of Tai Chi. Specifically, we're looking at something that comes up a lot, frame structure.
Right, the large, medium, and small frames. And crucially, how they connect to the internal stuff, the Neigong practices.
Exactly. Think of this as your personal guide. We've been listening to a really interesting chat between Damon Bramich and Sifu Matt Stamp on the Bashi Tai Chi Lifestyle channel.
Yeah, they covered a lot of ground.
They did. So our mission here is to pull out the key ideas about those frames, large, medium, small, and how they actually link up to the deeper internal work. We want to give you something clear, something you can actually use.
It's a good source because Damon and Matt, they sort of cut through some of the confusion you often hear. They started off talking about how sometimes practitioners can get a bit, obsessed with the frames themselves.
Yeah, like just the look of it, maybe losing sight of the bigger picture, the total practice.
Exactly, and they miss the internal development side.
Absolutely, and they had this really neat way of framing it, no pun intended, about different frames for different stages.
Right, like the large frame being really good when you're younger.
Yeah, for building that solid base, strength, stamina, doing that really deep foundational work. It's that idea of train big, fight small.
Which is a classic concept.
So what's the main advantage of doing it that way, training big?
Well, the key thing they stressed is that training big isn't just about making bigger movements. It's more about setting up these really deep integrated body mechanics, getting your full range of motion.
Like those really low stances you sometimes see.
Precisely. Those long, low stances, they force your whole body to work as one unit. You're basically forging connections, pathways that are just much harder to develop if you only do small movements.
Oh, okay.
And this helps develop what they call Jinan and Chen-Jin, that sort of coiling and releasing power. Plus, you get that essential unity between your upper and lower body and coordinating your internal intent with the external movement.
So it's about building the engine, really. These core connections are vital for actual power and sensitivity later on, right?
Exactly. You need that foundation.
That makes a lot of sense. So large frame builds the fundamental wiring, if you like. Then they mentioned the medium frame. More adaptable, perhaps, for older practitioners.
Yeah, sort of a way to keep refining the skills, keep the principles alive, but maybe adapting as your physical capabilities change over time.
Less physically demanding, perhaps?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Still working the principles, though. And then the small frame was presented as like another level of refinement, maybe something for much later in your journey.
Interesting. And they brought up Yang Chen Fu, didn't they, with his famous large frame, those super deep stances.
Yeah, and the point wasn't just that it looked impressive.
No, it had a purpose.
Right. His large frame was a method, a tool for really maximizing the development of those internal connections we were just talking about, deepening everything.
But it's not the only way, or the end goal.
Well, Damon and Matt pointed out that it's not the final destination, no. Eventually you need to integrate the refined, subtle stuff, they called it small Jin, like a delicate, almost invisible force.
Okay.
You need to integrate that with the power you built using the large frame, the large Jin.
Bringing them together.
Exactly. This integration, this kind of uniting of opposites, leads to what they call the Qianlong element, a really refined, super sensitive kind of power.
Okay, right. So let's unpack that. How does this process, uniting the big, expansive movements with the tiny, subtle ones, actually help you cultivate Neigong, those deeper internal practices? What's going on inside?
It's fascinating, actually. The structure of the large frame itself, it sort of creates the perfect internal environment for these processes to really take root and grow.
How so?
Well, the deep stances, the full body coordination, they naturally encourage a much deeper engagement of your dantian, your body's core power center down in the abdomen.
Right.
And engaging the dantian properly has this knock-on effect. It helps with things like the microcosmic and macrocosmic orbits, circulating energy along specific pathways.
Okay, those sound quite advanced.
They are, but the large framework lays the groundwork. It also really enhances what's called muscle tendon washing, strengthening, cleansing, lubricating those tissues. And it affects the fascia, that whole connective tissue web in your body.
So the large frame movements kind of amplify all these internal processes.
In a way, yes. Because the whole system is engaged and working together in a coordinated fashion. It makes those internal practices more accessible, more potent.
They even linked it to Chinese medicine concepts, didn't they? Something about the brain being the sea of qi.
Yeah, that was interesting, connecting it to your overall well-being. The idea is that the kind of integrated movement you get in Tai Chi, especially large frame, stimulates your endocrine system.
Hormones and things.
Exactly. Which can lead to the release of beneficial neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
Dopamine, serotonin, maybe even a bit of adrenaline in certain contexts. Things that affect your mood, focus, overall balance.
What was that brainwashing idea? That sounds a bit intense.
Yeah, it's not literal washing. It refers to stimulating the flow of your cerebrospinal fluid. That's the fluid around your brain and spinal cord.
Okay.
And Tai Chi movements, particularly the subtle opening and closing of the Min, point in the lower back, and how you engage your pelvis that helps move this fluid. It has its own cycle, apparently, around 12 to 17 minutes. It's crucial for brain health.
Wow. So the physical movements are directly impacting brain function.
And it's not just the brain either. They made a point about overall body movement. Even simple things like using your calf muscles properly improves circulation everywhere. It helps harmonize the nervous system, the endocrine system.
And maybe even helps with pain.
Potentially, yes. By improving flow and reducing tension. It's all interconnected, you see.
It really paints a picture of Tai Chi as this incredibly holistic practice.
Definitely. From that Chinese medicine view, different exercises work different elements or systems. Tai Chi, especially well-practiced large frames, seems to touch on so many.
Like?
Well, the fire of circulation, the water of internal fluids and lubrication, the air of breath, strengthening muscles, bones, tendons, the earth, and metal aspects, perhaps. It's about bringing harmony to the whole system.
Okay, so let's nail this down. Neigong, in this context, what is it exactly, and why is the frame, particularly the large one, seemingly so important for it?
Right. So Neigong, as they were discussing it, isn't just some vague energy work. It's about tangible internal developments. Things like deep diaphragmatic breathing, cultivating focused intent, strengthening and cleansing down to the level of bone marrow and tendons.
Bone marrow washing, tendon washing?
Yeah, those kinds of practices. And ensuring the smooth flow of qi or vital energy. The large frame provides the essential structure, the physical movements that allow you to develop what they call touching needle.
That refined internal sensitivity again.
Exactly. You can think of it like this. The physical movements, the yang aspect of the large frame, create the necessary conditions, the space, for cultivating the internal awareness and power, the yin aspect. They work together.
Yin and yang in training. Makes sense.
And they argue pretty strongly that the large frame is just more effective for certain things. Building bone marrow, washing the tendons, generating that internal heat or warmth.
How does that work?
It comes from engaging the dantian properly, coordinating through the three harmonies, aligning hips with shoulders, knees with elbows, wrists with ankles, and connecting through the 10 points all over the body. It creates this internal pressure and movement.
So, while you might get some benefits from smaller frames...
You might, absolutely. But for the highest levels, especially things involving martial skill and that ability to really manifest solid and empty, they argued you really need the foundation built through large frame practice.
Okay. Solid and empty, we'll definitely come back to that.
Yeah, it's crucial. The large frame helps develop what they described as a bellows action in the torso. And it cultivates this feeling of fire underneath the dantian, a deep internal power source.
Generated from the core.
Generated from the core, coordinating the whole body, and then expressed precisely. You know that feeling instructors sometimes talk about deep in the legs during practice?
Yeah, the burn.
Well, they link that feeling to the elixir field, suggesting it points toward profound hormonal benefits, similar to what you might get from other really dedicated internal practices, like some forms of Qigong.
Interesting. Okay. But let's tackle some potential confusion. People often say, quite reasonably, that practicing small or medium frame is fine, especially just for health. Damon and Matt acknowledge that, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that goes back to your goals. If health and general well-being are your main focus, or if you're older, smaller frame practice can be fantastic, no question.
But there's a but.
There's a but. The crucial thing to grasp, they argued, is that the frame isn't just the outward shape. It's more like the fundamental grammar, the language, through which all the core Tai Chi principles get expressed.
Like the 13 powers or energies?
Exactly. Practicing the frame correctly, especially the large frame initially, is how you embody those principles so they become reflexive, natural responses, particularly if you're interested in the martial side.
Which leads to that interesting paradox. You need the structure, the form, to eventually achieve a kind of formlessness in application.
Right. The disciplined practice builds the neurological pathways, the embodied understanding, so you can react spontaneously but precisely without having to consciously think through every step.
They mentioned Sun Lutang's idea too. Aim small, miss small. perfecting the form leads to effective use.
Yeah, refining the tool makes it work better, and this ties into the history they discussed. They pointed out that if you look around, you see inconsistencies in how Tai Chi applications are demonstrated across different schools, different lineages.
Why is that?
Well, it suggests that how the art was transmitted, who learned from whom, and maybe what aspects were emphasized or even lost along the way, has had a big impact.
And they mentioned Fu Zhongwen.
Right, as perhaps the closest student of Yang Chengfu, implying his way of moving is a very direct, possibly the most direct, representation of Yang Chengfu's original teaching. His lineage shows a lot of consistency.
That's significant for people tracing lineage. They also talked about Yang Chengfu's own modified form, the one taught widely to the public.
Yeah, the suggestion was that this public version might have been, let's say, streamlined, maybe omitting some of the more obviously martial elements, using higher stances to make it more accessible.
The health version.
Kind of, which is great for accessibility, but it might have also led to some people not fully grasping the deeper potential, the full range of what Tai Chi can be. You just have to look at footage of someone like the elderly Fu Zhongwen to see the incredible skill possible within that more traditional framework.
It wasn't just gentle exercise for him.
Not at all. And this connects to another issue they raised. Practitioners sometimes jumping ahead, trying to do the fast forms, maybe, without really mastering the slow, long form first.
What happens then?
Often it looks disconnected. The movements lack that internal coherence, that rooted power that comes from building the foundation properly.
Back to the foundation again.
It always comes back to that. Historically, learning this stuff often involved long apprenticeships, right? Years of dedicated practice to get a deep, embodied feel for it, not just learning the choreography.
A different model from learning a routine in a few classes.
Very different.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they stress the importance of helping people where they are, tailoring the teaching to their goals, self-defense, health, spiritual growth, and respecting their individual capabilities and limitations.
Good point. Okay, let's circle back to that crucial concept you mentioned, solid and empty. They referenced Chen Weining's books and a specific change in describing the single whip move.
Yes, this is fascinating. Apparently, earlier descriptions might have talked about turning on the solid leg, the weighted leg, but later, or perhaps in more martially focused explanations, the emphasis shifted to turning on the empty, unweighted leg.
Why does that matter so much? It sounds like a small detail.
It seems small, but martially it's huge.
Yeah.
It completely changes how you generate power, how you maintain your connection and structure, especially against an opponent's force.
Okay.
And as Damon and Matt said, thinking in terms of solid and empty is often much more descriptive and useful in a dynamic martial situation than just saying, be relaxed. Relaxation is part of it, but solid empty describes the functional state of your balance and structure.
So how does it work in application? Creating an empty space.
Right, the idea is to use your understanding of solid and empty to subtly disrupt your opponent's balance. You create a kind of void, a drop-fall situation, as they put it, where they can't effectively root themselves or apply force to you. You destabilize their mechanics.
And achieving that ability.
Comes back, again, to the foundation built in large frame training. That deep understanding of rooting, weight shifting, controlling your own center, maintaining structure under pressure, it all develops through that practice.
You need the large framework to get the sensitivity and control to play with solid and empty effectively.
Precisely. Without that embodied understanding, it's just an intellectual concept. You can't do it reliably when it counts.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this deep dive really highlights that while, all Tai Chi frames have value, the large frame plays this really crucial role. It's the foundation layer for developing the deep internal skills, the Neigong.
Yeah, we saw how it connects to deeper breathing, energy flow, circulation, even things like nervous system balance and endocrine function. And the historical context is important too, understanding lineage, the purpose behind the forms, and why that solid foundation in the long form matters so much.
Definitely. So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. Even if you mainly practice a smaller frame right now, perhaps for health reasons, how might understanding these principles behind the large frame foundation actually deepen your own practice?
Right. Could it enrich your appreciation? Maybe make you curious about the history or the deeper applications? Something to consider.
We definitely encourage you to keep exploring, keep doing your own deep dive into this really rich and fascinating art. Thanks for joining us today.